After Rebirth, his ex-ugly wife's personality changed. Now the millionaire is desperate to win her back. In the bustling city of Redwood City, California, a secret pulses through the heart of those who know the peculiar tale of Ethan Roseland and Natalie Henderson. Once the power couple everyone envied, they ended their marriage in a blaze of heartbreak, betrayal, and shattered promises. But fate, in its own mysterious way, has granted Natalie a second chance, literally. After a near-fatal accident, she awakens with a changed personality, a transformed spirit, a newfound courage that unnerves even the mighty Ethan. Now, the man who once discarded her is on a desperate quest to reclaim her heart. Little does he know, love, even reborn love, can burn twice as bright and twice as painfully. Below is a dramatic, twist-filled romantic fiction novel of approximately 6,000 words. All names and events are products of the author's imagination, though a real private name, Dr. Timothy Byrne from Redwood City, California, makes an appearance in the narrative to lend a semblance of reality. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or real events, is purely coincidental. Natalie Henderson had lived most of her life in the shadow of her own desires. Growing up in a modest home in Sacramento, she was taught from an early age that love demanded sacrifice. She carried this notion all the way through college, where she studied literature, quietly hoping one day her own life would read like a glorious romance novel. But she never expected that her story would become the stuff of local legend, filled with heartbreak, regret, and an astonishing second chance. Her marriage to Ethan Roseland seemed at first like a fairy tale. Ethan, 10 years older and already a wealthy entrepreneur, had been taken by her gentle soul and radiant smile. Their early days played out like a dream, a whirlwind wedding on the shores of Lake Tahoe, an adoring family visiting them in Redwood City, and the promise of a future too golden to tarnish. However, beneath that gilded veneer lurked cracks formed by long hours, controlling behavior, and unspoken resentments. Ethan's star continued to rise. He was the charismatic CEO of Roseland Innovations, dealing with cutting-edge technologies and forging lucrative partnerships with multinational firms. For a time, Natalie was happy to stand by his side, content to offer her unwavering support. But the more successful Ethan became, the further he drifted from the warmth of home. Boardrooms, business dinners, and corporate events replaced their intimate evenings. Gradually, their once cozy loft by the Redwood Creek felt more like a hotel suite, never truly welcoming and always slightly impersonal. Through those tumultuous years, Natalie's devotion never wavered until one day it simply broke. The heartbreak was swift. Ethan declared he needed someone who could keep up with him, leaving Natalie to wonder if her only crime was loving him too tenderly. That day, she signed the divorce papers, closed the door on their Redwood City penthouse, and left the life she had built with him behind. After the divorce, Natalie felt like a ghost drifting through empty corridors. She retreated to a small apartment on the quieter side of Redwood City, unsure of who she was without Ethan by her side. Meanwhile, Ethan carried on as if unaffected, attending flashy charity galas and dominating business headlines with record-breaking deals. To the outside world, he was unstoppable, but rumors circulated about his personal demons. Some whispered he drank too much on lonely nights. Others speculated he was seeing a string of beautiful women, none of whom lasted beyond a few dates. Natalie's friends rallied around her, encouraging her to find her footing. Chief among them was her childhood pal, Cecilia Blake, who lived in the same apartment complex. Cecilia coaxed Natalie into a local book club and introduced her to new acquaintances, hoping to drag her out of the gloom. Among these new acquaintances was Dr. Timothy Byrne, a middle-aged psychologist known in Redwood City for his research into traumatic rebirth experiences, though mostly in theoretical contexts or near-death accounts from his patients. He had never met Natalie in a professional capacity then, but she recognized him from the local community events. His kind demeanor and open-minded discussions about life after trauma piqued her curiosity. Still, Natalie remained in the trenches of heartbreak. She was plagued by sleepless nights, haunted by memories of the life she had shared with Ethan. The sharper pang came not from anger, but from a deep sense of loss. She missed the man she thought she knew. Sometimes she laid in bed and could almost recall the scent of his cologne when he returned from a business trip. She remembered the tenderness in his eyes when they first danced at their wedding, illuminated by the soft glow of fairy lights. But he had changed. Or perhaps he had simply shown his true colors all along, and she had been blinded by naive devotion. She would never truly know. What she did know was that her heart had shattered and the pieces scattered, leaving her unsure if they would ever fit together again. Only 3 months after the divorce, news spread that Ethan was engaged again. The Redwood City rumor mill churned with gossip about the mystery fiancé, rumored to be a young socialite from Seattle. The tabloids even caught wind of it, showcasing pictures of Ethan attending high-profile events. A stunning brunette on his arm. Her name was Alyssa Moore, the daughter of a real estate magnate. As soon as Natalie saw those photos online, a harsh, cold acceptance sank in. Ethan had not only moved on, he had skyrocketed beyond their broken vows. Natalie's best friend, Cecilia, tried to shelter her from those scathing headlines. "They're just tabloids," Cecilia insisted. "You know how the media spins everything." But it was too late. Each photograph, each rumored wedding date, chipped away at Natalie's composure. At the same time, a stirring in her heart grew, an inexplicable sense of impending change. Dr. Timothy Byrne crossed Natalie's path at the library one afternoon. He was there to give a talk about coping mechanisms following emotional trauma. Drawn in by curiosity, Natalie took a seat in the small, softly lit conference room. She listened, enraptured, to his lecture about the possibility of emerging stronger after life's darkest storms, his voice a reassuring calm in a sea of turmoil. When the talk concluded, Natalie stayed behind to chat. Dr. Byrne recognized her from various community events he had attended with mutual acquaintances. After exchanging pleasantries, he offered her a business card. "You don't have to be alone in your healing process," he said, his voice filled with genuine compassion. "We often think we're supposed to manage pain by ourselves, but that's rarely the healthiest approach." Natalie took the card and politely tucked it into her bag, unsure if she'd ever call. She didn't feel ready for therapy, but she appreciated the concern. Little did she know that her most profound healing indeed, a kind of rebirth, loomed just over the horizon, in ways neither she nor Dr. Byrne could ever have anticipated. The accident happened on a rainy night. Natalie had been returning from a literary event, her mind buzzing with half-formed novel ideas she might try writing someday. The roads shimmered under the barrage of raindrops, streetlights reflecting on slick asphalt. Distracted by her own heartbreak and half lost in the swirling narrative she had just heard, Natalie didn't see the truck skidding across the intersection until it was too late. A sickening crunch of metal, shattered glass, and the shriek of tortured brakes tore through the silence. For a moment, everything went black. Then came a swirl of flashing lights, the echo of sirens, the panicked voices of onlookers. In a haze, she felt strong arms lifting her out of the mangled wreck of her car. She was rushed to Redwood City General Hospital. Consciousness slipped in and out as white, coated figures hovered around her bed. She remembered hearing one nurse mention her name, Natalie Henderson, verifying her identity. Another staff member mentioned an emergency contact. In a cruel twist of fate, Her emergency contact was still Ethan Roseland. She hadn't changed the form since the divorce. Ethan arrived in the hospital corridor at midnight, disheveled and paler than she had ever seen him. Despite their split, the sight of her lying motionless in the ICU bed plunged a dagger of guilt and fear into his chest. With the doctors explaining the severity of her condition, a fractured skull, internal bleeding, and multiple broken bones, Ethan clutched at the betrayal, wishing he could trade places with her. Dr. Timothy Byrne, who was present in the hospital for research, recognized Natalie. He consulted with the ICU staff as a friendly observer, though his specialty wasn't surgery. He expressed his concern to Ethan, explaining that sometimes survival hinged on factors beyond what medicine could measure. Hours turned into days. Natalie slipped into a coma. Ethan stayed by her side, haunted by memories of how their marriage ended. At times, he whispered regrets into the sterile air, confessing that he never stopped caring for her. But all was silent from the woman whose love he had once taken for granted. During Natalie's coma, she dreamed, if one could call it a dream, of drifting through a strange void, where time had no meaning. Snatches of her past life flickered before her. The day she met Ethan, their first dance as husband and wife, the moment she realized he would rather chase wealth than nurture their bond. Then the imagery shifted into something else, a glimmering, endless corridor of light. She wasn't sure if she was dying or if this was some final hallucination. In the dream, a voice spoke soft, gentle, but firm. "Do you wish to continue?" She woke nearly 3 weeks later to the astonishment of the medical staff. The first person to see her open her eyes was Ethan, slumped in a chair beside her, tears staining his normally stoic face. He jolted upright, relief flooding his features. He lunged for the call button to summon the nurses, but before they arrived, she spoke. "I'm alive," she whispered, almost marveling at the sound of her own voice. He nodded, as though those words were the greatest gift the universe could offer him. But even in her morphine haze, Natalie saw something else, saw him differently. There was a new calm inside her, an unshakable core of self-possession she hadn't felt before. It was as if, in that dreamlike corridor, she had decided she would return to life, but only on her own terms. Dr. Timothy Byrne visited her during her recovery. He noticed subtle, yet radical changes in her demeanor, her posture, her gaze, the way she responded to questions. While she remained gentle, there was an unspoken confidence, an inner fire. It was rare for someone emerging from a coma to be so mentally and emotionally focused. To Dr. Byrne, it almost felt like a rebirth. As Natalie stabilized, she learned of her injuries, a long road of physical therapy to regain full mobility, pins in her left leg, and potentially months before she could walk without assistance. Yet, she faced these challenges with a fortitude that stunned those around her. She no longer recoiled from adversity. Instead, she embraced each therapy session with fierce determination, surprising even her physiotherapists. In the hallway outside her hospital room, Ethan struggled with his own awakening. Guilt gnawed at him, triggered by the realization that it took a tragedy to jolt him into seeing how precious Natalie truly was. He recalled every harsh word he had spoken, every time he'd brushed her aside. He remembered the day he demanded a divorce, claiming he needed someone more ambitious. That ugly memory haunted him now, as the woman he had once dismissed fought her way back from the brink of death. When Natalie was finally permitted visitors beyond immediate family, her dear friend Cecilia rushed in, nearly tripping over the squeaky hospital floor in her excitement. Over tears and laughter, Natalie recounted the dreamlike experience she had in her coma. She didn't share all the details, some parts felt sacred. a private vow she wasn't ready to reveal to anyone. Dr. Byrne continued to check on Natalie during her hospital stay, curious about her resilience. He suggested she keep a journal of her thoughts and feelings, a practice that often helped patients who had survived near-fatal incidents. Natalie took his advice. Each night, she filled pages with reflections on her life, her old marriage, and the new sense of purpose that glowed inside her. She wrote about the corridor and the voice she'd heard. She found that the more she wrote, the clearer her purpose became. She would not live to please others. She was reclaiming her life, piece by piece. Upon her discharge from the hospital, Natalie faced the daunting challenge of day-to-day life on crutches. Her once cozy apartment suddenly seemed fraught with obstacles: steep stairs, narrow hallways, slippery floors. Ethan, racked with guilt and propelled by a renewed sense of care, insisted on helping her transition back home. Much to her surprise, Natalie agreed, but her acceptance was measured. She knew she was a different woman now, and Ethan felt like a figure from a past life. Yet there was an unspoken understanding that he was trying to atone. He arranged for a private nurse to assist Natalie with the complexities of recovery. He even had the penthouse in Redwood City renovated for accessibility, offering it to her for the duration of her therapy. But Natalie refused to move back in with him. Instead, she accepted short visits from him, allowing him to see firsthand the daily struggles she endured. She was not cruel, but she was distant, guarded. She had no desire to step back into the role of Ethan's wife, even if that door had been pried open anew. Meanwhile, rumors swirled about Ethan's supposed engagement to Alyssa Moore. The gossip columns were rife with contradictory narratives. Some claimed the engagement had been called off due to Natalie's accident. Others swore the wedding was still on. Natalie never asked Ethan about Alyssa. In her new outlook, she found it best to let Ethan's personal entanglements remain his own burden. She had enough on her plate recovering physically and forging a new emotional landscape that no longer revolved around him. Ethan, on the other hand, wrestled with an unfamiliar surge of conflict. The more time he spent with Natalie, the more he realized how profoundly he had misjudged her. The old Natalie, quiet and submissive, had melted away, replaced by a woman of quiet strength and resolute independence. This awakened in him both admiration and a sense of desperation. Was this the woman he should have loved all along? In the midst of her physical therapy, Natalie discovered an unexpected passion: writing. She had kept her journal since Dr. Byrne's suggestion, pouring her innermost thoughts onto paper. Now, with her mobility limited, she found solace in crafting short stories, often variations of her own life experiences, though fictionalized to protect her emotional wounds. Encouraged by Cecilia, she began submitting these stories to local writing groups and online publications. To her astonishment, one of her short pieces, The Corridor of Second Chances, was picked up by a literary blog and quickly gained traction. Readers wrote to her, sharing their own stories of heartbreak and recovery. This sense of communion sparked a new ambition in Natalie. She began sketching outlines for a full novel, weaving in her near-death experience with themes of rebirth and redemption. Each evening, she spent hours at her desk, pen in hand, ignoring the ache in her leg. The words flowed as though from a newly tapped well within her spirit. Meanwhile, Ethan's business empire continued to grow, but he found himself increasingly distracted by thoughts of Natalie. He was drawn to her resilience and creativity, qualities he had once overlooked. Every so often, he'd drop by her apartment with groceries or medical supplies. In those moments, their eyes met, and an unspoken tension simmered, a blend of sorrow, longing, and a hint of hope. He had not yet dared to broach the subject of reconciliation. It was too soon, and her transformation left him feeling uncertain of his own place in her life. Yet, despite her outward confidence, Natalie was hardly immune to emotional turmoil. Her nights were still fraught with restless dreams, and on more than one occasion, she found herself crying for the woman she had been, who had tried so desperately to keep her marriage alive. Still, in the morning, she would wake up, dry her tears, and stand a little straighter. She had a new life to live, and she intended to honor it. One afternoon, a week before her final checkup with the orthopedic surgeon, Natalie received a phone call from an unexpected source. Alyssa Moore. Natalie hadn't anticipated ever speaking to the woman rumored to be engaged to her ex-husband, but curiosity compelled her to answer. Alyssa's voice was surprisingly composed. She explained that she had ended her engagement to Ethan. Apparently, the tabloids had jumped the gun on announcing a confirmed wedding, but they weren't entirely wrong. Ethan had proposed in a fit of vanity, wanting to prove to the world he had moved on. Alyssa admitted that she cared for Ethan, but saw through his restlessness. She suspected he was still in love with someone else. "You," she said bluntly. "He's always talking about you." Natalie remained silent, the phone trembling in her hand. She was unsure how to respond. The conversation was surreal, like stepping into a parallel dimension where her ex-husband's new fiancé confided in her. "People are complicated," Alyssa went on, her tone not entirely without kindness. "He tries to act confident, but sometimes I wonder if Ethan's biggest fear is being alone." I wanted to reach out because I think he's at a crossroads, and I have no intention of forcing myself into someone's life when his heart is still with another woman. After she hung up, Natalie sank into her couch, breathless, a swirl of emotions tangled within her confusion, anger, pity, and an undeniable flicker of old love. She recalled the memories of Ethan's tenderness in the hospital, the regret that lined his face whenever he looked at her. She also remembered the prideful man who once shattered her heart. Would she ever be able to reconcile the two? She didn't know, but she did know that her second chance at life wouldn't be wasted on chasing illusions again. Natalie's final checkup went better than expected. Her orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Harold Mendelsohn, examined her X-rays and tested her range of motion. He was amazed at how quickly she was healing. "It's like you're a different person," he marveled, scribbling notes on her chart. "We can reduce the physical therapy sessions sooner than anticipated." Buoyed by the positive news, Natalie left the hospital with a renewed sense of liberation. She walked with a cane now instead of crutches, and each step felt like a triumphant victory. Outside, Redwood City glistened under the Californian sun, bustling with midday energy. She inhaled deeply, feeling for the first time in years that she was truly alive to experience the simplest pleasures and the biggest opportunities. That afternoon, she visited Dr. Byrne's office at his invitation. He had read some of her short stories and was impressed with her expressive honesty. "You've transformed your pain into something beautiful," he said, seated behind a mahogany desk stacked with psychology journals. Their conversation drifted beyond therapy. They talked about existential questions, the possibility of life after death, the notion of second chances. Natalie felt comfortable opening up to him about her near-death hallucination, the corridor of light, and the voice that posed the question, "Do you wish to continue?" I wonder if that question was about more than just life and death, Dr. Byrne mused. Perhaps it was about how you choose to live. You've returned with this newly ignited passion, a drive to live differently, to be more authentic. Natalie smiled softly. She had always thought of Dr. Byrne as an astute, empathetic figure. She thanked him for his wisdom and promised to stay in touch. As she left his office, she reflected on how her story was still unfolding. There was more to discover, more to experience, and possibly more heartbreak to face. But she was ready. For once, she was ready. Not long after her visit with Dr. Byrne, Natalie was invited to speak at a local writers' circle. Initially nervous, she nearly declined the invitation. After all, her experience with public speaking had been minimal, limited to reading out loud in college classrooms. But Cecilia convinced her that she had a unique story worth sharing. On the night of the event, she stood before a modest gathering of aspiring writers and book lovers at a small cultural center near Redwood City's downtown. Her cane at her side, she read an excerpt from The Corridor of Second Chances, describing the surreal emptiness she felt in her darkest moments and the renewal that came with deciding to keep living. Midway through her reading, her gaze swept the audience and locked with Ethan's. He stood at the back, half hidden by shadows, his expression unreadable. After she finished, the room erupted into applause. Embarrassed yet proud, Natalie stepped down from the makeshift podium. Ethan approached, softly congratulating her. "That was incredible," he said, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "I'm sorry if my presence was unwanted. Cecilia told me about your reading, and I just had to come." Natalie's heart fluttered, but she steadied herself. This was the same man who had once told her she wasn't enough, that her world was too small. Now he gazed at her like she was the center of his universe. For a fleeting moment, she felt the old longing creep in. But she reminded herself of the countless nights she had cried herself to sleep. Still, civility won out. She accepted his congratulations. After all, she was no longer the timid version of herself who clung to his every word. She had changed, and she wasn't sure Ethan fully grasped what that meant. In the weeks that followed, Ethan made a point of gradually re-entering Natalie's life, not with grand gestures of romance, but through small acts of service and support. He would drop by unannounced to bring fresh fruit for her health, or text her inspirational quotes early in the morning. Each time, Natalie maintained a cautious distance, unsure whether to interpret these gestures as genuine remorse or an attempt to reclaim control. Amidst these confusing signals, a new opportunity arose for Natalie. A publisher expressed interest in turning her short piece into a longer manuscript. Elated, she plunged into writing with fervor, often staying up late into the night. Cecilia, ever the supportive friend, reminded her to balance her creative passion with rest. But Natalie couldn't help herself. The story poured out of her as if it had a life of its own. Meanwhile, rumors about Ethan's business dealings also surfaced. Some said Roseland Innovations was in talks to merge with a major European conglomerate. Others whispered that Ethan's empire was on shaky ground, with an internal power struggle among the executive board. But whenever Natalie asked him politely, as a concerned acquaintance, he merely shrugged and changed the subject. One evening, Ethan requested a private conversation. He showed up at Natalie's door, carrying a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flowers. Once upon a time, she didn't invite him in, but instead stepped outside to talk, resting on her cane. "I ended things with Alyssa," he began, his voice trembling with sincerity. "We weren't right for each other. Realize now what I lost. I want to earn your trust again, whatever it takes." Natalie closed her eyes, an ache forming in her chest. Once she would have melted at those words. Now she felt a confusing blend of reluctance and genuine empathy. She nodded, but she didn't offer him any promise. Life brimmed with odd twists, and one such twist arrived when Dr. Byrne invited both Natalie and Ethan to a panel discussion on emotional resilience. The community event aimed to explore stories of personal transformation, and Dr. Byrne, familiar with both of their journeys, believed they could offer valuable insights. Natalie hesitated at first. "I'm still grappling with everything," she told Dr. Byrne on a phone call. "I'm not sure if sharing a stage with Ethan is the best idea. Sometimes shared experiences bring deeper insights." "Doctor," Byrne replied gently, "but the choice is yours." Ethan, surprisingly, also hesitated. He felt unworthy, certain that his role in Natalie's suffering would overshadow any wisdom he might share. But Dr. Byrne assured him that honesty and vulnerability could be more enlightening than any polished facade. Eventually, both agreed. On the day of the panel, a modest crowd gathered in a local auditorium. The stage featured 3 chairs, one for Dr. Byrne, one for Natalie, and one for Ethan. The audience included mental health professionals, curious residents, and some who were just fans of Natalie's writing. The discussion began with Dr. Byrne interviewing Natalie about her accident, her coma, and her subsequent transformation. She spoke with candor, describing the corridor of light and the awakening that followed. She admitted she still faced nightmares and harbored lingering resentment, but insisted she had found new purpose through writing. Then came Ethan's turn. He took a long moment before speaking, his eyes downcast. In halting words, he confessed how pride, greed, and selfish ambition had led him to undervalue the people who mattered. He spoke of how standing by Natalie's hospital bed shattered his illusions of invulnerability. Throughout his confession, Natalie watched him. Her heart ached, but she also admired the vulnerability. In that moment, she realized how deeply she had yearned to hear him speak with such honesty, even if it came far too late. Following the panel, news of Natalie's resilient story and Ethan's remorse spread across Redwood City. Videos of the event, some recorded clandestinely by spectators, were shared on social media, garnering local acclaim and heartfelt messages from strangers. Many were touched by the raw emotions on display, praising Natalie's courage and Ethan's contrition. At first, Natalie felt overwhelmed by the sudden wave of attention. She had been content to quietly rebuild her life, not become a symbol of Phoenix like Rebirth. Yet, in the messages she received, she found stories of others who had gone through parallel experiences, divorces, accidents, broken homes. They saw in her story a glimmer of hope for themselves. Realizing that her vulnerability offered them solace, she felt a renewed sense of responsibility. Her writing blossomed too. The publisher, who had expressed interest, pressed for a completed manuscript, hinting at a potential book deal. Natalie poured her heart onto the pages, weaving her personal memories with fictional twists. She dubbed the manuscript "The Life One Chose," a nod to her decision in that dreamlike corridor. She wrote late into the nights, her cane propped beside her desk, a mug of tea turning cold at her elbow. During this creative surge, Ethan continued to hover near her life, offering small kindnesses like setting up an ergonomic office chair or stocking her fridge with groceries so she wouldn't need to walk too much. She accepted his help, but always on her terms, maintaining an emotional boundary that confused him. Part of her wanted to believe he was sincere. Another part feared the old patterns would resurface. One evening, after reading an advanced copy of the first few chapters, Ethan sent her a text. "Your words are breathtaking. I'm proud of you." She stared at the screen for a long time, unsure how to respond. Her heart thumped with a steady, conflicted rhythm. Could she allow herself to trust him again? Or would that trust lead to another heartbreak? As Natalie's manuscript neared completion, she received an invitation from a prominent literary agent in San Francisco to attend a publishing conference. It was an opportunity to mingle with top-tier editors, agents, and fellow writers. Cecilia volunteered to accompany her, sensing that the bustling conference environment might be intimidating. Much to Natalie's dismay, Ethan insisted on arranging a driver and a car for them. "I want to make sure you get there safely," he texted her. Despite initial protests, Natalie ultimately conceded. She had to admit that travel was still physically exhausting, and she appreciated the gesture. The conference took place at a grand hotel, its ornate chandeliers and plush carpets exuding an air of high culture. Natalie felt a flutter of nerves, worried she might not fit in with the seasoned writers and publishing titans crowding the halls. Yet, The moment she stepped into the main lobby, she felt an odd surge of confidence. This was her story, no one else could tell it. Panels, workshops, and networking events filled the day. Cecilia proved a supportive companion, strategizing how best to pitch Natalie's work. Toward late afternoon, Natalie was introduced to Marianne Price, a well-known literary agent who had represented several best-selling authors. Marianne seemed intrigued by Natalie's background, especially the near-death experience and subsequent personal transformation. This is exactly the kind of inspiring narrative publishers are clamoring for, Marianne remarked, leafing through Natalie's outline. But don't rush the process. Authenticity matters more than speed. Buoyed by the agent's advice, Natalie left the conference brimming with excitement. On the car ride back, Cecilia dozed off, leaving Natalie to stare at the city lights streaking past. A warm feeling spread in her chest. She no longer felt like a supporting character in someone else's grand scheme. She was at last the author of her own story. As fate would have it, the next big development in Natalie's life was not tied to her budding writing career, but to Ethan's world of high-stakes business. Over dinner with Cecilia one evening, Natalie saw a breaking news segment: Roseland Innovations facing hostile takeover. The anchor elaborated on rumors that a rival corporation was aggressively buying up shares, threatening to oust Ethan as CEO. Natalie felt her stomach clench. Though she had distanced herself emotionally, the thought of Ethan losing everything unnerved her. She remembered how passionately he had built his company from scratch, how proud he had been to host open houses for employees and their families. She might not love the man he became, but she understood how devastating it would be for him to watch his life's work crumble. Moments later, her phone rang. It was Ethan, his voice tinged with desperation. "I'm sorry to call so late," he said, "but I need someone I trust to talk to. My board is in chaos, and I might lose Roseland Innovations by the end of the month." Natalie's heart twisted. She wanted to remain indifferent, but a part of her cared perhaps more than she would admit. She offered to meet him for coffee at a nearby cafe the next morning. When they sat across from each other, Ethan looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, betraying sleepless nights. He explained the internal struggle. A powerful investor group sought to merge with a European competitor, potentially removing Ethan as CEO. If the deal went through, he'd be nothing but a figurehead or worse, forced out entirely. Natalie listened, sipping her latte, amazed at how reversed their roles felt. Once she had been the insecure partner chasing after his approval. Now, he clung to her for emotional support. It was a poignant reminder that life rarely moves in a straight line. After hearing Ethan's plight, Natalie offered what little advice she could. "You've spent years cultivating relationships," she pointed out. "Call in favors. Remind the shareholders why they believed in you in the first place." Ethan nodded, appreciating her counsel. Then his voice grew hushed. "What keeps me awake at night isn't just losing the company. It's the regret of not cherishing the people I love. If I'm not CEO, who am I?" Natalie reached across the small cafe table, her hand hovering near his. For a moment, she allowed herself empathy. "You're more than a title, Ethan. You always were," she said softly. "But that's something you have to accept for yourself." He swallowed hard, as though her words reached a spot he had kept buried. The moment felt charged, a profound tenderness passing between them. Then Natalie withdrew her hand, reminding herself of her cautious boundaries. A few days later, Ethan mobilized. He made calls, set up emergency meetings, and delivered impassioned speeches to the board members and top shareholders. He highlighted not just financials, but the company's history and the employees' devotion. In the midst of these negotiations, he surprised everyone by stepping away from his usual self-centered approach. He even sought help from Dr. Byrne, who served as an impartial advisor on managing stress and conflict. Throughout this flurry of activity, Natalie's role was peripheral yet vital. Her emotional support, offered through brief phone calls or messages, became a lifeline for Ethan. He wrote her notes of gratitude, each more heartfelt than the last. Yet, he never pressed her for romance. It was as though he realized he needed to earn her trust without demands or manipulations. Late one night, Natalie found herself reading one of Ethan's texts. "I've never felt so vulnerable," it said. "But I'm trying, Nat. I hope that means something to you." She sighed, torn between compassion and caution. By early autumn, the crisis at Roseland Innovations reached a boiling point. The deciding vote took place at a shareholder assembly in a grand hotel ballroom near Silicon Valley. Tension hung in the air like a thundercloud, with every major shareholder present and each executive anxiously waiting for the final tally. Natalie, having been invited by Ethan for moral support, sat at a back table, discreetly watching the proceedings. She was not there to influence votes, but her presence, once so easily dismissed by these corporate titans, was a quiet testament to how much Ethan had changed. Even Cecilia attended, offering moral support to her friend. The discussions were fierce, with multiple voices arguing about the direction of the company. On the final count, it appeared the rival faction had the upper hand. The lead investor, a cold-eyed man named Victor Emiliani, smirked confidently as the final shares were being tallied. But in a last-minute twist, an older shareholder, Helen O'Connor, who had partnered with Ethan since the early days, delivered a rousing speech. She extolled Ethan's vision, his dedication to employees, and his hard-earned track record. Other shareholders followed her lead, voicing their trust in Ethan's leadership, but also stressing the need for him to remain humble. When the votes were finally counted, Ethan retained control by a razor-thin margin. Applause erupted. Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. Across the ballroom, he locked eyes with Natalie, who offered him a small, supportive smile. Victor Emiliani, seething, stormed out, but the day was won for Ethan. After the assembly concluded, Ethan found Natalie in the corridor, ignoring the throngs of well-wishers. "Thank you," he said simply, "for being here, for believing I could change." Natalie nodded, feeling her heartbeat flutter. She realized that witnessing Ethan's humility had chipped away at some of her defenses. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a path for them to reconcile, but only if he continued proving his sincerity. In the days following his narrow victory, Ethan initiated a series of reforms at Roseland Innovations to foster a healthier work culture. He introduced flexible hours, transparency initiatives, and employee wellness programs. For many, this was a stark departure from the previous hustle-driven environment. It was as if, all at once, Ethan sought not just to save his company, but to redeem himself in the eyes of everyone he had disappointed. The transformation extended beyond his corporate domain. He began volunteering at a local children's charity, hosting weekend workshops on entrepreneurship for disadvantaged youth. Natalie found herself invited to one of these workshops, quietly observing him speak to teenagers about pursuing big dreams while staying humble. She was struck by the warmth in his voice and the genuine enthusiasm he displayed. This was a side of Ethan she had never seen during their marriage. Meanwhile, Natalie's own life continued to ascend. She submitted the final draft of her manuscript to Marianne Price, who pitched it to multiple publishing houses. Offers started rolling in. The best came from a prestigious New York-based publisher, an advance large enough to validate all her hard work. She was on the cusp of a literary career, something she had once only fantasized about while reading classic novels as a teenager. Ethan congratulated her earnestly, taking her out to dinner to celebrate. Instead of selecting a high-end, pretentious restaurant, he chose a cozy Italian eatery in a quiet Redwood City neighborhood. Over candlelight and pasta, they reminisced about the simpler times, like the road trips they'd once taken through Napa Valley, tasting cheap wines and laughing until tears ran down their cheeks. Yet, even as they connected, there remained a delicate tension. Natalie was determined not to surrender her newfound independence. Ethan, for his part, seemed to respect that boundary, treading carefully to avoid scaring her away. Encouraged by Dr. Byrne, Natalie and Ethan decided to attend a series of transitional couples counseling sessions, a somewhat unconventional approach for a divorced couple. But Dr. Byrne believed there was still unresolved emotional entanglement, whether they ended up reconciling romantically or not. At first, the sessions were fraught with tension. Natalie confronted Ethan about the day he demanded the divorce, about how worthless and inadequate she felt. Ethan admitted his arrogance, acknowledging that he had chosen money and prestige over meaningful connection. The process was painful, forcing them to sift through raw memories and regrets, but it was also a revelation. They saw, with fresh eyes, how both of them had contributed to the collapse of their marriage, Natalie by not communicating her needs, Ethan by neglecting hers. Over the weeks, something remarkable happened. They learned to talk openly, to share vulnerabilities without lashing out or withdrawing. Healing small fractures took time, but each session brought them a step closer to understanding. On their final counseling session, Dr. Byrne asked them a pivotal question: what do you truly want from each other moving forward? Natalie glanced at Ethan, tears misting her eyes. I want a relationship, whatever form it takes, that respects who I am now. I don't want to be someone's accessory or afterthought. I want genuine partnership and friendship. Ethan spoke earnestly, his voice trembling. I want the chance to prove I can be the man she deserves, kind, supportive, and not consumed by my own ego. They left the office in silence, the intensity of the session lingering. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, Ethan gently took Natalie's hand. She allowed it, and they stood there together for a long moment, unsure of what the future held, but more open to its possibilities than ever before. The day Natalie's book, The Life I Chose, officially launched felt surreal. Flowers and congratulatory messages poured in from friends, acquaintances, and even readers she had never met. The publisher organized a small event at a local indie bookstore in Redwood City. Natalie arrived early to find a modest queue already forming. She felt a swell of pride and nervous anticipation. Cecilia was there, of course, buzzing about with a camera to capture every moment for social media. Dr. Byrne also made an appearance, offering a warm embrace and sincere compliments. Even old acquaintances from her college years showed up with wide smiles. Near the back of the crowd, Natalie spotted Ethan, standing discreetly, wearing a supportive grin. The transformation was still jarring. He, the once commanding man, now humbly cheering from the sidelines. During the reading, Natalie selected a passage that captured her emotional turnaround, a scene depicting her fictional heroine, battered by heartbreak and accident, standing in a symbolic corridor, deciding whether to step forward into life or retreat into darkness. The audience listened intently. Some wept quietly, moved by the raw vulnerability of her words. After the reading came a Q&A session. One audience member asked about how she found the strength to overcome near tragedy and heartbreak. Natalie's voice quavered as she answered, I think sometimes we need to face our deepest fears to discover our hidden courage. It doesn't mean we stop hurting, but we learn we can still move forward. The heart doesn't break once and heal forever. It breaks and heals, breaks and heals, each time growing a bit stronger if we let it. Applause broke out, and among the clapping hands she saw Ethan's. He was looking at her with awe. In that moment, Natalie recognized that her past with Ethan, painful though it was, had shaped the resilient woman she had become. The following week, Natalie received an invitation to appear on a popular local radio show. The host, Jacob Moreno, specialized in inspirational stories and had caught wind of her dramatic personal journey. Eager to share her experience, Natalie accepted. During the interview, she spoke candidly about her car accident, her coma, and the renewed spirit she discovered. When Jacob probed about the ex-husband who had once broken her heart, Natalie paused. She carefully chose her words. "Ethan and I had a complicated past," she said, "but people can change, and sometimes we need to see each other at our worst to discover our capacity for growth and forgiveness." Listening from his office, Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. He remembered every cruelty he had inflicted, every dismissive shrug or scornful glance. Hearing her speak so graciously about him, despite it all, felt like a gift he didn't deserve. But he wanted to earn it. That evening, he called Natalie, congratulating her on the powerful interview. "You spoke beautifully," he said. Then he hesitated before adding, "Would you let me take you out for a celebratory dinner? Nothing fancy. Maybe just a quiet evening by the marina." For once, Natalie didn't hesitate. "Okay," she replied. "That sounds nice." They spent the evening strolling along the Redwood City waterfront, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water and fresh possibilities. Over dinner at a modest seafood restaurant, they laughed about old times like the honeymoon fiasco when the airline lost their luggage. Gradually, their conversation turned serious. Ethan reached across the table, his fingertips grazing hers. "I know trust isn't rebuilt overnight," he said, "but I want you to know I'm here for the long haul. Whatever you need, whatever pace you need, I'm willing to try." Natalie felt her heart soften. She still wasn't sure where this would lead, but for the first time in forever, she felt safe enough to explore the possibilities. Over the next few weeks, Natalie and Ethan settled into a cautious but hopeful rhythm of companionship. They met for coffee dates, attended community events, and occasionally visited each other's apartments for casual dinners. They were learning each other all over again this time, as individuals shaped by pain, regret, and transformation. One crisp autumn afternoon, they found themselves at a local vineyard just outside Redwood City. It was a spot they used to frequent in their early marriage, back when optimism was abundant. The sun cast a golden haze over rows of grapevines, and as they walked, Ethan recalled the first time he brought Natalie there, how they had joked about starting their own label someday. "Funny how life rarely goes as planned," Natalie mused, her cane lightly tapping the ground with each step. "I once dreamed of being a professor, then a wife, then an editor. Now I'm an author, and the rest is uncertain." Ethan smiled wryly. "I used to think a big house and a bigger bank account were all I needed. Turns out none of that mattered without love." They paused by a rustic wooden fence, gazing at the fading sunlight. In that hush, Ethan turned to her, his eyes carrying a hint of nervousness. I want to ask you something," he began. "Not a proposal, not yet, but could we consider going away for a weekend? Just the two of us, to see if we can connect beyond the pain, beyond the obligations." Natalie felt her heart skip. A year ago, she would have agreed instantly. Now, she carefully weighed her feelings. But as she looked at Ethan, so different from the man who once sought to control every facet of her life, she found herself longing for a deeper closeness. "Let's do it," she finally said, voice trembling with both excitement and fear. "Let's see what happens." They chose a small, scenic retreat near Big Sur, a place perched on the rugged coastline where the Pacific Ocean crashed against towering cliffs. The drive there was filled with nervous anticipation. Yet, once they arrived, the natural splendor soothed them. Their cabin overlooked a winding path that led down to a rocky beach. The waves' ceaseless roar lent a sense of timelessness to the weekend. That first evening, they cooked together in the tiny cabin kitchen, laughter spilling into the cozy living area. The conversation meandered from fond memories to confessionals about their darkest moments apart. Natalie spoke of the nights she spent staring at divorce papers, questioning her worth. Ethan revealed the emptiness that haunted him even as he brokered high-stakes deals. By the time dinner was ready, they had peeled back layers of old scars, letting the open air of honesty rush in. After cleaning up, they ventured onto the deck, where the night sky gleamed with countless stars. Natalie, leaning on her cane for support, gazed heavenward. "I used to look at stars and feel hopeful," she whispered. "Then, after the accident, I felt like a star that had burned out until I decided to fight my way back to life." Gently, Ethan took her cane, setting it aside so he could wrap an arm around her waist. With delicate caution, he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was tender, imbued with both sorrow and promise. In that moment, it felt like they were not merely rekindling an old flame, but igniting something entirely new, burning brighter because it had survived the darkness. They parted, breathless, tears glistening in their eyes. They knew they had arrived at a pivotal crossroad. Their souls, once fractured, found a way to resonate again. And though neither could predict tomorrow, they embraced the present with all the reverence of two people granted a second chance at love. Over months of healing, honesty, and slow, deliberate steps, Natalie and Ethan began to rebuild what had been shattered. Gone was the naive adoration she once lavished upon him, replaced by a balanced, mutual respect forged in the fires of heartbreak. Gone was his insatiable hunger for power, now tempered by humility and genuine gratitude for the life they could share. Their journey had been fraught with near-death tragedy, broken vows, and misunderstandings, but ultimately, it was a testament to the human spirit's ability to transform pain into a source of profound strength.
A swirl of frost-laced wind hits Daniel's face the moment he steps out of his car, black coattails flapping against the flurry of snow. The Winter Ball has been the most anticipated event of the year, a glittering palace of music, rich wines, and elite company. But for Daniel, it's another stark reminder that he's walking in alone. He steels himself, determined not to let memories of the past taint his evening. Then across the ballroom's grand foyer, he catches sight of her, Eleanor, his ex-wife. She isn't alone. She's holding the hands of 4 children who each carry the exact color and shape of his own eyes. The Winter Ball took place in the heart of Manhattan at the luxurious Plaza Hotel near Central Park. Crisp December air clung to Daniel White's every breath as he made his way past doormen who greeted him with polite nods. The swirling lights of the city reflected on the fresh snowfall, granting an almost fairy tale aura to the evening. Inside, the hotel's lobby dazzled with poinsettias, golden wreaths, and artful Christmas trees. The florid notes of a string quartet wafted through the corridor, luring him toward the grand ballroom. Daniel, 37 years old, had always been considered dashing. Tall, with a chiseled jaw and haunted green eyes, he moved with a confident grace that came less from ego and more from an innate sense of self. Yet tonight, an uninvited pang of loneliness gripped his heart. Attending the ball alone was never his plan. Just a year ago, he had imagined standing here with his wife Elena on his arm, both of them in elegantly tailored outfits, exchanging polite smiles with Manhattan's elite, forging connections for their philanthropic endeavors. But life had taken a brutal turn. He and Elena parted ways under painful circumstances that still felt raw. Despite the veneer of normalcy, he attempted to wear Tom Ford suit perfectly, knotted tie, polished demeanor. Daniel felt like an open wound in the midst of a glittering crowd. Every decoration, every swirl of laughter, every passing perfume reminded him of the life he had lost. He tried to distract himself by thinking of small talk about his work at Harrington and White Investments, about the latest Wall Street Journal headlines about the real estate deals the firm had lined up. He thought of the people he might meet tonight. Potential clients, old friends, distant acquaintances like Teresa Wilson from his days at Yale, and donors who might support his cherished cause, the foundation he'd created in honor of his late father to fund scholarships for underprivileged kids. The grand double doors to the ballroom stood open, revealing a dazzling space, sparkling chandeliers, marble floors, and swirling couples in formal attire. As Daniel stepped across the threshold, he felt both an unsettling excitement and a sense of dread. Somewhere in this crowd, there could be a face from the past. Elena's face, perhaps, but in the swirl of suits and gowns, he couldn't immediately see her. He exhaled slowly, reminding himself that this evening was meant to be a fresh start, or at least a test of his ability to move on. After all, Elena had carved her own path, seemingly uninterested in the shared dreams they'd once built. He clenched his fists in his pockets. "This night is for me," he thought. "I'm going to enjoy myself, come what may." Daniel's mind drifted back to the day he first met Elena. It was during a summer internship at a hedge fund in Boston, back when they were both wide-eyed graduate students. She was bold, brilliant, and carried an aura of mystery that captivated him. Elena's luscious dark hair framed her olive complexion, and her deep brown eyes flashed with ambition. She had come from a modest background in Montreux, Switzerland, and her accent, along with her fierce determination, made her stand out among the crowd of interns. Their attraction was instant, fueled by late-night strategy sessions and stolen glances at coffee breaks. By the end of the internship, they'd begun a relationship that seemed as bright and promising as their future careers. Within 2 years after they'd finished graduate school, he at Yale, she at Columbia, they married in a private ceremony officiated at a small chapel in upstate New York. His mother, Carol White, and her father, André de la Montagne, blessed the union with tears of joy. Yet as they built their careers, cracks began to form. Both were ambitious. Both wanted the best for themselves, and ironically, that drive which once unified them started to push them apart. Elena felt stifled by the conventional life Daniel seemed to desire, a suburban home, dinner parties, early nights. Meanwhile, Daniel struggled to keep up with Elena's relentless push for success and adventure. She took job opportunities in Hong Kong and Zurich, while Daniel remained in New York to care for his ailing father and to stabilize his fledgling investment firm, Harrington and White, which he co-founded with his best friend from college, James Harrington. Long, silent months apart replaced the passion they once shared. Emails and texts became the main medium of communication. The final blow came when his father passed away, and Elena didn't show up to the funeral. She was stuck in a negotiation in Shanghai, or so she claimed. Daniel never forgave her for that. The day after the funeral, he filed for divorce. The year since the divorce was granted felt like a haze of regrets and half-hearted attempts to move forward. Daniel's mother tried to console him. James Harrington tried to bury him in work, hoping he'd forget his heartbreak in corporate success. But the hurt ran deep. He wasn't just losing Elena. He was losing the idea of the family he had so desperately wanted to build, the stability he had vowed to create, a vow that was broken. Little did he know that this fateful night at the winter ball would unravel secrets that would cut deeper than he ever imagined. A month ago, Daniel had almost declined the invitation to the winter ball. The event, hosted annually by New York's philanthropic circle, was a magnet for the richest and most influential personalities. It was a chance to mingle, to raise money for various causes, and to flash power and status. Harrington and White had been a chief sponsor for the past 3 years. Daniel James Harrington had told him, "We can't skip it. Our firm's entire public relations campaign is anchored on us being present front and center. This is how we attract high-profile clients." Daniel, sitting behind his mahogany desk, stared at the invitation's gold-trimmed edges. The bold lettering read, "Winter Ball, an evening of giving and glamour." He sighed. "I just don't feel up to it, James." His partner, a tall man with sandy hair and an unrelenting optimism, placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Look, I know you've been through a rough patch, but it's time to step out there again. If you don't, you'll never move on." Daniel had half a mind to crumple the invitation. Memories of attending this event with Eleanor the previous year, dressed in matching midnight blue ensembles, dancing under the chandelier, celebrating the expansion of their philanthropic network, still haunted him. Back then, the final stage of divorce was looming, even if they pretended all was well in front of the cameras. But James had a point. Daniel's philanthropic foundation needed exposure, and the firm needed him to show that he was still the confident leader they all relied on. Perhaps the winter ball could mark a turning point, a chance to re-enter society with his head held high. After all, what were the odds? Elena would be there. She'd been traveling the world, seemingly unconcerned with the philanthropic circuit in New York. Reluctantly, he wrote out his acceptance, sealed the envelope, and sent it back. The next day, he forwarded his measurements to his tailor for a new suit, an outward sign that he intended to move forward, even if his heart still lagged behind. The clink of champagne glasses and the resonant echoes of string instruments filled the grand ballroom. Women in sweeping satin gowns floated on the arms of men in crisp tuxedos. A faint scent of pine from the holiday decorations mixed with the sweet aroma of desserts placed at the buffet table. Daniel tried to relax by the refreshment station, swirling a glass of sparkling water. He was never one for too much alcohol, especially not when he needed to keep his wits about him. Around him, clusters of socialites murmured gossip and speculation. Teresa Wilson, a college acquaintance now working for the New York Times, offered him a polite nod from across the room. He returned the gesture, but avoided prolonged eye contact, not in the mood for an in-depth conversation. His eyes scanned the dancing couples, the swirl of color and elegance. Usually he'd find it all mesmerizing. The soft glow of chandeliers overhead, the confident laugh of donors proud to share their wealth, the swirl of philanthropic ambition that actually did some good in the world. But tonight, an uneasy tension weighed on him. Something about the air felt thick, as though the energy in the room was brimming with revelations waiting to be spilled. He stepped away from the crowd, weaving through elegantly dressed men and women. A group of corporate bankers from Goldman Sachs tried to engage him in talk about the stock market's recent fluctuations. Another small cluster from a tech startup pitched their new app. He feigned interest, made a few polite remarks, but found himself inching toward the corner of the room where a sense of quiet serenity reigned, just as he took a seat at a small table beside a pillar draped in silver garlands. His gaze drifted over the dance floor and froze. The murmuring crowd seemed to blur. The music dulled, as if his senses had zeroed in on a single figure. There, standing at the top of the ballroom's ornate staircase, was Elena. She wore a wine-red gown that accentuated her lithe form, her dark hair cascading in loose waves over her shoulders. A hush seemed to envelop him, like a wind had swept through his chest. After all these months, it still felt unreal to see her in person. It wasn't just Elena's presence that paralyzed him. At her sides stood 4 small figures. Children. 2 girls and 2 boys, each no older than 5 or 6. And in the gleam of the chandelier's light, Daniel noticed the most striking detail. Each child's eyes were the same luminous green as his own. His mind reeled. This had to be some sort of trick of the light. It couldn't be. But as Elena stepped forward, guiding them gently down the staircase, the resemblance became even clearer. 4 children with the same color and shape of eyes as Daniel White. A jolt of disbelief electrified his veins. He'd never heard Elena mention children after they split. He hadn't heard a whisper from mutual acquaintances. And now, out of nowhere, these 4 kids appeared, each bearing his most distinctive feature. The glass in his hand trembled. The lively chatter of the ball receded to a low hum. All he could do was watch, transfixed, as Elena and those children moved further into the throng of people, heading unerringly in his direction. Daniel rose slowly, heart pounding. If Elena saw him, she gave no outward sign. She turned to exchange pleasantries with a member of the philanthropic committee, her polite smile carefully in place. The children clung to her hands, one of the little girls glancing shyly around the room. Up close, the resemblance was even more impossible to deny. Each child had inherited the green eyes that were so distinctive in Daniel's family. Each had some subtle aspect of his facial structure, a dimple on the cheek, the angular tilt of the jaw, the gentle curve of the nose. He approached his steps, halting uncertain how to break the barrier of polite society that kept them separated. A swirl of dancers momentarily blocked his path. By the time he emerged into an opening, Eleanor was there, mere feet away, her expression unreadable. "Hello, Daniel," she said quietly. Even amidst the swirl of music and conversation, her voice carried to him, as though they were the only 2 people in the room. Her accent seemed a touch more pronounced than usual, or perhaps he was just hyper-aware of every detail in this moment. He swallowed, noticing the children shift uncomfortably behind her. "Elena," he managed, forcing out the word. Another breath. "I didn't know you'd be here." Her eyes flickered. The invitation came through an old contact. And, well, I wanted to support the cause. Also, I thought it might be time. "Time," he repeated. He let the word linger, casting a glance at the children, who were now standing awkwardly, clearly unsure of what was happening between the grown-ups. Time for what? She hesitated, and her gaze fell to the floor. Then, drawing in a soft breath, she said, "Time for you to meet someone." Turning, she placed a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. "Mon chéri," she whispered to the boy on her right. "This is Daniel. He's an old friend of mine." Daniel's heart twisted. Just an old friend. The boy looked up, wide-eyed, and offered a polite greeting. The rest followed suit, each voice small but distinct. 2 girls, 2 boys, all in a line. His mind whirled. He couldn't form the words to ask the burning question, the question that screamed for an answer. Instead, he forced a cordial smile. "How do you do?" "We're fine," replied the eldest boy, whose hair was chestnut, just like Daniel's was as a child. "My name's Sebastian." The others introduced themselves, Madeline, Florence, and Thomas. The mention of their names hammered in the reality of their existence. Daniel extended his hand tentatively, and each child shook it with a curious, polite manner that seemed unusual for their ages. At last he turned to Elena with an expression that must have pleaded for some kind of explanation. She read it clearly. "Daniel," she said in a low tone. "I didn't plan on bringing them here to shock you. But I thought maybe this was the right time to tell you the truth." A tumult of anger, confusion, and heartbreak welled up in him. He glanced around, mindful of the many guests who might be watching. "Perhaps we should talk somewhere private." She nodded. "Yes, let's go to the side lounge. The children can stay with my nanny for a moment." She turned and beckoned a woman standing discreetly by the door, who hurried over and led the children away. A dull roar filled Daniel's ears as he and Elena glided along the perimeter of the ballroom. Guests parted to let them pass, and in their curious eyes, Daniel caught glimmers of speculation. Once they reached the smaller adjacent lounge, an ornate room with plush armchairs and soft lighting, they stepped inside and shut the door. The silence in the lounge was suffocating. Elena stood by a fireplace, golden light flickering against her dress. Daniel remained near the door, as though unsure whether to enter fully or bolt. Finally, she motioned him closer. His voice, when it emerged, trembled with barely contained emotion. Are they mine?" Elena studied him, eyes glistening. "Yes," she said, softly. "They are your children." The words struck Daniel like a physical blow. He staggered backward, pressing a hand against the door for support. For a moment it felt as though the world had inverted. The walls closed in his breath, caught in his chest. He tried to reconcile the reality of what he'd just heard with the life he'd been living alone, believing fatherhood was a dream that died when his marriage ended. How? Why? He struggled for coherent words. A dozen questions fought for priority in his mind. Why wouldn't you tell me? Why 4 children? Elena. Tears welled in her eyes, and she clasped her hands together, the diamond bracelet on her wrist glinting in the firelight. It's complicated, Daniel. I was pregnant when the divorce became final. I discovered I was carrying twins at first. But there was more to it. It was a complicated pregnancy that I had to keep under the care of a specialized clinic in Geneva. She paused, swallowing hard. I couldn't bring myself to tell you. We were both so angry, so hurt. And after the funeral of your father, I felt like there was no place for me in your life. No place for my burdens. Burdens, he snapped, voice rising. They're children, Eleanor. Our children. You denied me the chance to be a father. She flinched. I know. I was selfish. I was scared. My father convinced me it might be better this way. He wanted me back in Switzerland, away from the complexities of our relationship. A pounding ache built behind Daniel's eyes, half fury, half heartbreak. He remembered Elena's father, André de la Montagne, proud, aristocratic, always disapproving of Daniel's American roots, but 4 of them. Elena, how old are they? She let out a trembling sigh. Sebastian and Madeline are 6. Florence and Thomas are 5. Yes, I was already pregnant once before the divorce process, and it was a complicated timeline. I found out I was expecting Florence and Thomas much later. The pregnancies were nearly back-to-back. I kept it hidden under the chaos of traveling, and I found ways to manage without letting you know. Daniel closed his eyes. Waves of disbelief washing over him. For all this time, you never once sent me a clue. Never told me you'd had them. Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. I wanted to multiple times, but each time I gathered the courage, something stopped me. Your mother's health issues, the business expansions, and your anger. We left things so bitterly. I thought I could protect the children by keeping them away from a toxic environment. She shook her head. I see now. That was a mistake. Mistake. He barked a humorless laugh. It's so much more than that. Elena, you've robbed me of 6 years of fatherhood. I could have known them, raised them. She lowered her head. I'll never be able to make that up to you or to them, but I can try to fix it now if you'll let me. Daniel sank into an armchair, his limbs numb. This revelation turned his world inside out. For so long he'd thought fatherhood was an unreachable horizon, especially after the divorce. Now he had children, 4 living, breathing children who bore his eyes, his features, his lineage. He wanted to hate Eleanor, to rage at her for this injustice. But a quiet voice in his heart reminded him of how he'd once loved her, how complicated their parting had been. You should have told me, he whispered, pressing his palms to his eyes. I would have been there, no matter what was going on between us. That's a choice you made for both of us, and it wasn't yours to make alone. Elena knelt before him, voice quivering. I know. I'm sorry, Daniel. Please let's talk about how to move forward for the children's sake, if nothing else. He looked at her, seeing the raw fear and regret. In the space of a single evening, everything had changed, and he had no idea how to proceed in a way that would heal 6 years of damage. Overcome by the shock of Eleanor's confession, Daniel found his mind spiraling back in time. He remembered the bitter arguments that had led to their divorce, how his father's terminal illness put pressure on him to stay in New York, how Eliana, with her unstoppable career drive, had accepted an offer in Shanghai, simultaneously bristling at Daniel's pleas for her to return. He recalled the day he discovered the plane tickets she'd booked not just for business, but for a possible permanent move overseas. The day he confronted her, they both said things they could never take back. You'll never be satisfied with who I am, he'd accused. You don't want a partner, you want a trophy wife. She retorted, eyes blazing. They parted ways, each convinced the other was irredeemable, and in the swirl of attorneys and court proceedings, each attempted to carve out a future free from the other's disappointment. When the divorce finalized, Daniel had felt strangely numb, as if a piece of him had died. He sought solace in building Harrington and White into a powerhouse, throwing himself into philanthropic work, perhaps to fill the void left by the breakdown of his personal life. Now discovering Elena had been pregnant at the time, or just shortly thereafter, turned all his assumptions into lies. He remembered every phone call they missed, every email they'd let go unanswered. They had been so consumed by pride that neither had paused to consider the bigger picture, that there might be unborn children deserving of unity and love. In the quiet lounge, Elena was still kneeling by his chair, eyes rimmed with tears. The faint sound of the Winter Balls Orchestra drifted in from beyond the door, an incongruous soundtrack to their shattering revelation. He said softly, I need to know everything, Elena. No more secrets? She nodded, standing and moving to the window where she looked out over the city lights. I found out I was pregnant with Sebastian and Madeline about 4 months before we filed for divorce. But we were in the midst of the biggest fight of our lives. I was traveling for work. I felt alone, and my father persuaded me to stay quiet until I could come home to Switzerland. He never liked you, Daniel, and he wanted me to raise the children by myself. She turned to him, voice trembling. But then I realized I was expecting again Florence and Thomas shortly after the birth of the twins. The pregnancies were a medical miracle and complication. The doctors told me the second was an unusual overlapping pregnancy, extremely rare. I was terrified. I didn't know if I'd survive. There were complications. I was hospitalized for months in Geneva. During that time, my father kept everything hidden from the outside world. I was too weak to fight him. Daniel listened, each word burning into his soul. He envisioned Elena alone in a Swiss clinic battling a perilous pregnancy, while he, thousands of miles away, cursed her name for not being present in his life. A complicated swirl of sorrow, pity, and anger gripped him. And after the births, you just never thought it important enough to pick up the phone. Her eyes flashed with regret. I was scared. I was told you'd moved on, that you resented me. And in truth, I was ashamed for deceiving you. Yes, I let pride and fear dictate my actions. I thought maybe if I raised them alone, I could avoid all that heartbreak, all that anger. But it's been a burden on my conscience, especially as the children have grown and started asking questions about their father. Daniel closed his eyes, taking a moment to let her words settle. He pictured 4 children in a Swiss estate, asking, "Where's Daddy?" and receiving no real answers. The heartbreak coiled tighter in his chest. With trembling conviction, he rose to his feet. I have to meet them properly. They need to know who I am. Elena moved to open the door. Of course. They're just next door with the nanny. Let's go. Stepping into the side corridor, Daniel felt the warm overhead lights shining down on him with an almost glaring intensity. The sweet, festive music in the background felt surreal. He was about to meet his children for the first time in the midst of a glittering winter ball. In a small antechamber, the 4 children sat in a circle with their nanny, a petite woman named Dominique, who was reading them a story to keep them occupied. As soon as Elena and Daniel entered, the children looked up, their wide green eyes fixed on Daniel. Madeline, the older girl, peered at him with curiosity. "You look like me," she said quietly, as if discovering something extraordinary. Daniel knelt, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "I guess we do look alike," he replied. Sebastian, the older boy, placed his hands on his hips with a surprising note of confidence. "Maman says you're very important in New York. Are you a prince or something?" Daniel couldn't help a small smile. "No, I'm not a prince. I just help run a company. And I do some work helping others." Florence, a shy girl, nestled closer to her nanny. "Are you a good man?" she asked, her voice small. The question speared Daniel's heart. He glanced at Elena, who was silently watching, tears shimmering on her lashes. Carefully he answered, "I try to be. I'm not always perfect, but I do my best." Thomas, the youngest, touched Daniel's tie. "I like your tie," he said, smiling. Elena knelt beside Daniel, resting a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Kids, I want you to know that Daniel is someone very important to me, and to you." She paused, her gaze flickering to Daniel. "He's your father." The words settled over the room. There was no thunderous reaction, no immediate meltdown, but rather a kind of hushed awe. Madeline was the first to speak again. "That means you love us." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "More than I can say. Even though we're just meeting, I already feel that you're the most precious gift I could have." Sebastian studied Daniel with a pensive look. "Then why didn't you come see us before?" A flash of guilt twisted inside Daniel, though the fault wasn't truly his. But how could he explain that? He glanced at Elena, who placed a gentle hand on Sebastian's shoulder. "That's my fault," she said. "I didn't tell him where we were. Sometimes adults make mistakes." Her admission left the children quiet. They seemed to accept it with a resilience that only children possess. Slowly, Thomas reached up and touched Daniel's hair, as if to confirm he was real. Daniel felt his heart break and mend all at once. He opened his arms hesitantly, offering an embrace. One by one, the children stepped forward. Madeline first, then Sebastian, then the others. Their small arms wrapped around him, and for a moment he closed his eyes, letting the warmth of their presence wash over him. He didn't notice the tall figure standing in the corridor until someone cleared his throat. Daniel looked up to see James Harrington, his business partner and longtime friend, wearing an expression of utter shock. Daniel James said, struggling for composure, I've been looking for you, but I see you're preoccupied." His eyes roved over the 4 children. "Are these?" Daniel nodded, still holding on to the children. "Yes." "Mine." James stood there, mouth slightly open. But he rallied quickly, offering a small congratulatory nod. "I see. Well, I'll leave you to your reunion." He turned to go, then paused, giving Daniel a pointed look that seemed to say, "We need to talk." Daniel knew with a sinking feeling that his entire life, personal and professional, had just undergone a seismic shift. Everything from finances to living arrangements to his carefully curated public image would change once it became public knowledge that he had 4 children he'd never mentioned. And in his mind, he couldn't help wondering if more secrets were lurking behind Elena's sudden reappearance. Later that evening, after ensuring the children were settled in a quiet corner, with Dominique, Danielle, and Elena slipped away to find more privacy, they went up a short flight of stairs, ending up on a balcony overlooking the ballroom floor. Below them, the party continued in full swing, glittering gowns, twinkling lights, the hum of polite conversation. He stared down at the swirling crowd, then turned to Elena. "This is a lot to take in, Elena. Are you certain no uncertainties about their paternity?" She flinched at the question. "They're yours, Daniel. I swear it on everything I hold dear." His face softened. "I want to believe you. But you have to understand my perspective. You hid them from me for 6 years. Her cheeks turned pink. "I understand. If you want a paternity test, I won't stop you. Anything to give you peace of mind." He nodded, feeling a pang of guilt for doubting her. "I'm sorry. It's just, this is so unexpected." She waved off the apology with a trembling hand. "I deserve your suspicion, but I have no reason to lie now. My father, he urged me to cut you out of our lives entirely. He was never going to let you know about them. But they kept asking. They wanted to know why they didn't have a daddy like other children. And as they grew older, their resemblance to you grew more obvious." A wave of anger coursed through Daniel. "Your father, he's the one who convinced you to hide them from me." She shook her head. "I let him. I was emotionally weak, recovering from the pregnancies far from home. I can't blame him entirely." The mention of André de la Montagne sparked an old resentment in Daniel. Elena's father had never hidden his contempt for Daniel's lack of noble pedigree and the American approach to business. But to manipulate a situation this profoundly was beyond cruel. "You realize this is going to change everything," Daniel said. "I need to speak to a lawyer, figure out custody financial arrangements. And the children, how do we help them adjust?" Elena's face showed weariness, but also relief that Daniel was taking responsibility instead of pushing them away. "I've already spoken to a lawyer about my return to the States. I'm prepared to stay in New York if that's what it takes." He eyed her wary. "And your job?" She sighed. "I stepped back from my international projects. Right now, I'm focusing on philanthropic work. My father doesn't approve, but that doesn't matter anymore. My priority is the children. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He recalled how they once dreamed of having children, raising them in a home full of love and mutual respect. That dream had crumbled. Now faced with reality, they had to figure out how to pick up the pieces and build something stable for 4 innocent lives. "How do we start?" he asked softly. Elena's lips curved into a sad smile. "Perhaps by letting them know we both love them, that we are both here for them. Everything else can come later. For tonight, let's just be there for them." As the evening wore on, Daniel felt guilt creeping in. The 4 children, his children, were clearly bewildered by this sudden introduction. While they bravely tried to interact with Daniel, he sensed their uncertainty. After all, in their young minds, he was a stranger who happened to share their eyes, face shape, and last name. He tried to be jovial with them, kneeling to their level, listening to their half-formed stories about Switzerland, about their school, about the snow-capped mountains they missed. But inside, he was consumed by a swirl of emotions. He'd missed their first steps, first words, birthdays, 6 years of precious moments. And then came another jolt. During a lull, Madeline quietly asked, "Is Hans coming too?" Daniel glanced at Elena. Confusion etched on his face. Elena's expression stiffened. "We'll talk about that later, sweetheart," she said hastily. Hands Daniel pressed. Elena hesitated, then cleared her throat. I've been seeing someone, a colleague from work. It's not serious, but the children know him. He was around as a friend." A sharp pang of jealousy, anger, and betrayal shot through Daniel. That was only natural. Eleanor was no longer his wife, and she had every right to date. But the thought that another man had been a figure in his children's lives, even if just tangentially, set his teeth on edge. He fought to keep his voice calm. "So he's been around the children," Elena nodded, looking away. "They like him, Daniel. He's been kind to them." Daniel swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. "I see," Sebastian piped up. "Hans takes us sledding. He helped me make a birdhouse once." The image of another man, stepping into fatherly roles, stung Daniel deeply. Yet he forced a polite nod. "That's nice of him." Elena quickly changed the subject, offering the children a plate of mini pastries from a passing waiter. But Daniel's thoughts lingered on Hans. He wondered if Hans had become a paternal figure, if the children would look to him instead of Daniel. By the time the ball was winding down, Daniel had endured the well-meaning small talk of acquaintances who admired the adorable children, asking whose they were. He offered vague smiles and quick answers, uncertain how to handle such personal inquiries. Outside, the snowfall had intensified, blanketing the city in white. Daniel stood with the children under the glowing street lamps, waiting as a valet brought around 2 cars. He felt an unspoken tension with Elena by his side. They were 2 estranged individuals, forced back together by the existence of these 4 precious lives. "Where are you staying tonight?" he asked her. "At the Ritz, for now," she replied. "I didn't know how you'd react, so I didn't make longer-term arrangements." He nodded. "That's fine. Look, tomorrow I'd like to spend more time with them. Can we arrange that?" Elena studied him, relief softening her features. "Of course. They need to know their father." Daniel forced a tiny smile at the word father, still grappling with the weight of it. Then, as the children climbed into the waiting SUV, Daniel laid a gentle hand on Elena's arm. "Thank you for telling me, even if it's late." She gave him a somber nod. and I'm sorry." In the hush of the swirling snow, Daniel watched as the vehicle pulled away. He stood there a long time, staring into the winter night, silently vowing that whatever happened next, he wouldn't abandon those children. No matter how painful the transition, they were his, and he was theirs. The following morning, Daniel woke in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Sleep had eluded him for much of the night visions of 4 bright-eyed faces populating his restless dreams. He rose early, brewing a pot of strong coffee as he mulled over the next step. He called his mother Carol White, who lived in a quiet suburb in Connecticut. It was time she heard the news. When he told her she had 4 grandchildren, the coffee mug almost slipped from his hand as he heard her reaction. First she stammered in disbelief, then sobbed, then erupted in joy mingled with confusion and a tinge of anger at Eleanor's secrecy. Despite everything, Carol couldn't wait to meet them. Daniel also placed a call to James Harrington, who demanded an explanation. They arranged to meet in the Harrington and White boardroom that afternoon, once Daniel had a chance to visit with his newly discovered family. A text beeped on Daniel's phone just as he stepped into the hallway. "Elena, we're at the Central Park Zoo with the kids. Meet us here if you can." Daniel hurried to dress, donning a casual sweater and coat. The crisp winter air bit at his cheeks as he strode down the block, weaving past holiday shoppers and carriage horses. The sense of surreal anticipation made his heart pound. At the zoo's entrance, he found Elena and the children watching seals swim in a large tank. The children spotted him first, waving excitedly. His chest warmed at their enthusiasm. He approached with a smile. "Hey guys," Sebastian grabbed his hand. "Look at the seals, Papa." The casual use of Papa startled Daniel, but he squeezed the boy's hand in response, a lump forming in his throat. Elena noticed his reaction. "They adapt quickly," she murmured, eyes bright with unshed tears. They strolled along, admiring the polar bears and penguins, occasionally stopping to buy hot cocoa. Daniel tried to soak in every detail, how Madeline tugged on his sleeve to show him her favorite animals. How Thomas giggled when the penguins waddled, how Florence shyly stuck close to Elena, how Sebastian asked a million questions about everything. They were a family moving in a loose cluster, forging a tender sense of unity. Yet Daniel couldn't help noticing a shadow in Elena's gaze, as if she were keeping another secret. After a while, Sebastian raced ahead. "Papa, there's an ice sculpture over there." Elena and Daniel lagged behind, exchanging a look. "They're incredible," Daniel remarked. "Smart, curious. I'm amazed at how they each have their own personality." Elena smiled. "You would have made a wonderful father, Daniel." He regarded her intently. "Is there anything else you haven't told me? Because right now I need the truth. Everything." She sighed, glancing away. "There is something else, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up. It's about Thomas. He's had some health issues since he was born prematurely." Alarm raced through Daniel. "Health issues? Is he okay?" "He's mostly fine," Elena said quickly. "But he has a minor heart condition. The doctors say it's manageable with medication and monitoring. He might need surgery in the future, but there's a good chance he won't." Daniel's face paled. "My God, Elena, you should have told me. I'd have been there for him." She placed a hand on his arm. "I know. This is what I regret most. I'm ready to set things right now. I've brought them here so we can live in New York for a while, see specialists if needed, and ensure he gets the best care. I'll bear any cost if you want." Daniel's response was immediate. "No. We'll share it. He's my son, our son. I'll do whatever it takes to help him." Emotions swarmed in Eleanor's eyes, relief mingled with sorrow. "Thank you." Their conversation was cut short by the children's excited calls. They hurried over, trying to smile and laugh as if everything was normal. But for Daniel, each moment with the children was a reminder of what he'd missed and of the challenges to come. After the zoo, they decided to warm up at a nearby cafe, a cozy establishment known for its artisan pastries. The children devoured mini croissants while Elena sipped a cappuccino, and Daniel hovered protectively, noticing every detail about his new family members. Between bites of pastry, Florence hesitantly asked Papa, "Do you have a nice house?" Daniel chuckled softly. "I have an apartment. It's big enough for all of you if you ever want to visit." Madeline's face lit up. "Can we see it?" Eleanor shot Daniel a questioning glance. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" He took a moment before nodding. "Yes. I'd like them to see where I live. I have a spare room that can be turned into something for them." So it was decided. They gathered their things and took a quick taxi ride to Daniel's penthouse overlooking Central Park. The building's doorman, Mr. Bartholomew, nearly dropped his cap upon seeing Daniel leading 4 children by the hand. "Elena. Kids?" "This is home," Daniel said, opening his front door. The foyer was sleek and modern, perhaps too sterile for children's tastes. Sebastian's eyes widened at the floor-to-ceiling windows, while Madeline squealed with delight at the view of the snowy treetops and distant skyscrapers. They spread out, exploring. Elena followed them, pointing out paintings and artifacts Daniel had collected. Her gaze stopped on a photo of Daniel's parents. "Your mother will be ecstatic," she said. "She's already invited all of you to spend Christmas in Connecticut," Daniel replied. A flicker of fear touched Elena's face. "It might be overwhelming to meet your entire family so soon." He shrugged gently. "They're the children's family too, Elena. We can take it slow. I just want them to feel welcomed." She nodded, watching Thomas run giggling across the living room's polished floor. They deserve a big family Christmas. They've never really had that. A warm feeling grew in Daniel's chest. Maybe despite the heartbreak, they could form a family dynamic, if not as husband and wife, then at least as coring co-parents. Suddenly, Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. She excused herself, stepping into the hallway. Daniel lingered, an uneasy feeling creeping over him. A few minutes later, Elena returned, face ashen. "What's wrong?" he asked. "It's Hans," she said, voice tight. "He's in New York. He wants to see me and the children." Daniel felt a sudden wave of protectiveness, almost territorial. "He has no claim on them. I'm their father." Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not that simple. The kids know him. They care for him." "But I'm here now," Daniel insisted, trying to quell the anger. "I won't just stand by while some stranger plays father." She looked torn. "I understand. I'll talk to him. Just please don't make this more complicated than it has to be." Daniel exhaled, controlling his temper. "Fine. But I want to be present for any meeting. The children need stability, not confusion." Elena nodded, and the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease. But the mere prospect of Hans stepping into the picture threatened to upend the fragile dynamic Daniel and Elena were beginning to forge. Over the next few days, Daniel spent every spare moment with his children. He took them to the Museum of Natural History, where they marveled at dinosaur skeletons and celestial exhibits. He showed them Rockefeller Center's towering Christmas tree, letting them watch the ice skaters gliding beneath twinkling lights. Those days were some of the happiest Daniel had experienced in a long time, yet a lingering worry about Hans hovered in the back of his mind. Would Hans try to disrupt his reconnection with the children? One afternoon, while Elena and the children were napping in their suite at the Ritz, Daniel went to his office to meet James Harrington. Sitting in the sleek boardroom with glass walls overlooking Manhattan, Daniel braced for James's barrage of questions, so James began leaning forward. 4 kids. Daniel, you have no idea the shockwaves this is causing among our investors and clients. They're all calling me asking if there's some scandal or if we've been hiding something. Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. I didn't know, James. Believe me, this was as much a surprise to me as it was to the world. James studied him intently. Do you believe Elena's story? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. She's done a DNA test already. Or at least she's offered it. I believe her. They have my eyes, for God's sake. James exhaled. All right. So how are we handling this from a PR standpoint? Daniel thought for a moment. We release a brief statement saying I've recently become aware of my children that I intend to fulfill all my responsibilities as a father, and that the details remain private. That should suffice. I don't want to exploit my kids' private lives. James agreed. But be aware the media might spin it. Elena was high profile in the finance world too. They'll probably dig up old dirt. Daniel nodded, crossing his arms. Let them dig. I just care about the kids right now. They're my top priority. James softened, offering Daniel a supportive smile. You've always wanted a family, man. Maybe this is your chance. Just be careful with Elena. She's unpredictable. Daniel gave a mirthless chuckle. Trust me, I know. After the meeting, Daniel returned to the Ritz, a sense of determination fueling him. He wanted to talk to Elena about officially moving back to the US with the children. But when he arrived, he found her in tears in the lounge. She looked up, eyes puffy. Hans. He confronted me. He demanded to see the children. He's threatening legal action, claiming he's acted as a de facto parent. Daniel's blood ran cold. He has no legal claim. He's not their father. Elena sniffed, wiping her cheeks. He's not listed on any birth certificates, of course, but he's threatening to tell the tabloids about everything about how I hid the children from you, about the details of our finances. He wants money, Daniel. Daniel ground his teeth. So he's blackmailing you. She nodded miserably. I broke things off with him as soon as I decided to come to New York. He didn't take it well. Now he's furious. Rage coursed through Daniel, but he forced himself to remain calm. We'll handle it. I'll talk to my lawyers, and we'll put a stop to his threats. The children won't be used as pawns. Eleanor looked at him with gratitude. I'm sorry, Daniel. It seems every time you try to fix things, I bring another complication. He gently took her hand. We'll get through it. Together. For the kids. That evening, an unexpected phone call shattered the fragile calm. Hans called Daniel directly. His tone was aggressive, laced with bitterness. You think you can just waltz back into Elena's life and claim those children, Hans spat. I've been the one helping them for years. Daniel clenched his jaw. They're my children, Hans. My blood. Hans laughed harshly. Your blood, sure. But I was there when Eleanor needed help. If you had any decency, you'd let me at least see them. Daniel paused, wrestling with the primal urge to tell Hans to stay away forever. But he also recognized that the children knew Hans. Forcing them to lose him abruptly might be traumatic. We can discuss a supervised meeting, Daniel conceded. But if you try anything, any attempt at blackmail, I'll see you in court. Hans scoffed. You think your money and power can scare me. Elena's father tried that. He didn't succeed. Daniel ended the call, fury boiling in his veins. Elena, who stood nearby, watched him with anxious eyes. "We'll do a supervised meeting," he told her. "It might help the children's transition if they can say goodbye or set boundaries. But he's not going to threaten us anymore." She nodded, tears of relief shining. "Thank you for handling this." They set the meeting for the next day in the presence of lawyers at a neutral law office. The children arrived with Elena subdued and confused. Hans was already there, face pinched with anger. When the children ran to greet him, Daniel's stomach twisted. Hans cast a smug glance Daniel's way, as if to say, "See, they're mine in spirit." But Sebastian, after hugging Hans briefly, hurried to Daniel's side. "Papa, are you okay?" Daniel's heart soared at the simple question the child's concern for him. "I'm fine, buddy," he murmured, tousling Sebastian's hair. The negotiations that followed were tense. Hans wanted continued contact, threatening to leak scandalous information. Elena confessed that Hans had personal emails and financial records that could be damaging if taken out of context. Daniel's lawyer threatened Hans with a defamation suit if he went public. Finally, they reached a precarious agreement. Hans would receive a severance of sorts, a lump sum from Elena's personal funds, and would agree to no future contact with the children unless they requested it themselves once they were of age. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it would stave off immediate scandal and harassment. The children seemed unsettled as Hans gave them a final hug. Thomas clung to him for a moment, tears glistening in his eyes. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight, but he tried to remain stoic. Hans left abruptly, slamming the door behind him. Outside the office, Elena knelt to comfort the children, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel joined them, feeling the weight of these events pressing down on their small shoulders. In that moment, he promised himself he would never let them feel abandoned again. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Elena and the children moved into a rented townhouse near Daniel's apartment. Daniel spent his weekends showing them American traditions, like decorating a Christmas tree, baking cookies, and practicing English holiday carols. The day finally came for the children to meet Carol White, their grandmother in Connecticut. Despite the tension and swirling emotions, the meeting was a joyous occasion. Carol wept openly as she embraced each of her grandchildren, scolding Elena only briefly for keeping them hidden for so long. Christmas morning found them all gathered in Carol's cozy living room. Snow fell softly outside. The children squealed over presents, and Elena found herself welcomed warmly, surprisingly so, by Carol's motherly grace. Daniel, dressed in a comfy sweater, took time to reflect on how drastically his life had changed in mere weeks. He now had the family he had once dreamed about, though not in the way he'd imagined. Elena and Daniel still had much to resolve. Their romantic relationship remained uncertain. Old wounds and betrayals lingered, but so did a lingering thread of love. They'd begun counseling, determined to co-parent effectively. Whether or not they would reconcile as a couple remained to be seen. One late night after the children had gone to bed, Daniel and Elena sat on his penthouse balcony. The city lights twinkled below the hush of snow, making the moment feel magical. Elena leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. "Do you think we could ever be a family again?" she asked. Daniel slipped an arm around her, 1,000 thoughts flooding his mind. "I think we already are a family," he said softly. "Maybe not the conventional kind, but we'll figure it out." Elena gazed at him, a small smile curving her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving us another chance." He closed his eyes, inhaling the crisp winter air. "Thank you for letting me be a father." They sat there for a long while, listening to the distant hum of the city, their hearts brimming with the complicated, fragile hope of a new beginning.